60 days, Earl. Then you're gone.
They thought one envelope could erase a man's whole life.
Don't make this ugly. You brought 3 cars to my porch. It's already ugly. Take the papers.
I don't want them.
Take them now. This land is worth more without you on it.
My family has been here since 1891.
Your family's not here anymore. Just stones.
Some lines don't need shouting to be crossed. Old barns burn easy. Old men fall easy. Accidents happen. Is that a threat, Sheriff? That's advice.
Margaret's roses look rough. Shame when nice things go to waste.
Talley thought he'd just broken an old man.
But silence isn't always surrender.
Hutchins.
It started. He threatened the barn and mentioned Margaret.
Then there's nothing left to wait for.
No. Now we let him think he's winning.
But Talley thought he was doing the easiest thing he'd done in 16 years as sheriff. He thought he was foreclosing on a tired old man who didn't have the money or the fight left to push back. He thought wrong because nobody warned him that the man standing barefoot on that porch had once held a position under sustained hostile fire for 6 hours with a broken radio and 2 broken ribs, refusing to move until every last man behind him was out. And nobody told him that when that man came home to Georgia and built a quiet life on his grandfather's land, he hadn't stopped being that person. He'd just stopped letting anyone see it. Earl Wayne Hutchins was 71 years old on the morning the sheriff's convoy came up his road. And he had not had a genuinely bad morning in 40 years, not because his life was easy, but because he had learned, in places where the cost of panic was measured in lives, the difference between a situation and a problem. A situation was something happening to you. A problem was something you hadn't prepared for. He was on the porch with his second cup of coffee when he heard the gravel. 3 vehicles. The sound was deliberate, too slow, too spaced. Like men who'd been told to make an impression before they said a word. Earl set the mug down, folded his hands, and watched the driveway. Sheriff Buck Talley came around the side of the house first, thick through the shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, despite the fact that the sun hadn't cleared the pine trees yet. One hand resting on his belt. 16 years as Breckett County Sheriff, youth football, Sunday choir, a photograph with the governor, and a lake house 40 miles north that no county salary ever built. 2 deputies behind him, one older, one young, maybe 25. Name tag reading, Bridger. Talley stopped at the base of the steps and looked at Earl the way men look at things they're planning to own. Earl. Just the name. A period at the end of it. Sheriff. Talley pulled a manila envelope from under his arm. He held it toward the porch. When Earl didn't reach for it, Talley didn't set it on the step. He dropped it. The thud of a man demonstrating what he thought your property was worth. County Board voted Tuesday. Eminent. You've got 60 days to vacate. County's offering $412,000. Earl looked at the envelope, looked at Talley. This land's been in my family since 1891. Not relevant. My grandfather built that house himself. I've got my parents and my wife buried on the east side. Also not relevant. Talley tilted his head. It's a fair price. For a man your age. Big property to manage alone. He let his eyes move to the barn. Slow and proprietary. The look of a man who already knows what he's going to do with the square footage. Then back to Earl. Old structures out here. Things happen when there's nobody looking after them properly. Accidents. In the corner of his eye, Earl watched Deputy Bridger look at the ground. I'll look at your paperwork, Earl said. Talley nodded at the older deputy. The man came up the steps, envelope in hand, and held it out 6 inches from Earl's face. Earl took it. 60 days. Talley said, get a lawyer if you want. Good ones are expensive in this county. He was already turning, then stopped without turning back. Margaret's roses are looking rough. Shame when nice things go to waste. He went around the corner. The deputies followed. The older one glanced back once. Bridger didn't look up at all. Earl sat there until the gravel sound was gone. 3 full minutes. The kind of stillness that isn't passivity, it's a man running a full assessment before he moves. Then he went inside, opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, moved Margaret's gravy boat, and took out a cell phone that had never made a call in the state of Georgia. It rang twice. Hutchins. Claire. It started. Eminent. 60 days. He mentioned Margaret's roses. A pause that was not surprise, it was recognition. Then there's nothing left to wait for. No. Don't move visibly yet. I know how to wait. He said. That's the whole point. He put the phone back behind the gravy boat. He went to the basement and came up with a metal box, dented, worn smooth on the lock from decades of handling. He put it on the kitchen table. He didn't open it yet. He went back outside and finished checking the soybeans. Because that's what you did on a farm when you needed to think. Clearly you kept working. 14 years ago, Earl had buried Margaret in the small cemetery beside the eastern fence line. In February, in red Georgia clay that came up to his knees when the frost broke. The only people who came were her sister, their pastor, and a man Earl had served with named Darnell Webb, who drove 6 hours from Macon without being asked. No one from the county, no one from the town. He had stood at that grave and made a decision. Not angry, not dramatic, just clear. If anyone ever came for this land, he would be ready. Not with a shotgun on the porch, with something that couldn't be dismissed or arrested or written off as an old man who didn't understand the paperwork. He'd spent 14 years getting ready in general. He'd spent the last 6 months getting ready specifically. The metal box held 3 documents. He'd shown them to exactly one person so far, a retired federal land records attorney in Athens, whom he'd driven to see in March, under a pretext, and who had authenticated all 3 without knowing why he was being asked. The first document was dated August 14. 1887. Department of the Interior, permanent water rights and surface ownership over the Hutchins parcel. Every boundary named, granted to the family in perpetuity. A treaty, which meant federal law, which meant no state eminent domain statute could touch it. The second was a 1,983 Army Corps of Engineers survey. The aquifer beneath this property supplied 40% of the fresh water for a 6-county region. The margin note was handwritten times, federal water security interests confirmed. No surface development without DOD and EPA joint review. The third was a 2019 EPA letter to the County Planning Commission. Any development on this parcel triggers mandatory federal environmental review. Meridian Land Group had no idea any of this existed. Or rather, someone in the company had found out 6 months ago when their geological survey hit the aquifer, and their lead engineer had resigned the same week and moved to Costa Rica. And someone had decided to move fast and hope the old man didn't know what was under his feet. Earl had known since 1983. He'd just never mentioned it. The lawyer's name was Patricia Okafor, 43 years old. Milledgeville. Small practice. Perfect record in agricultural disputes. No political debts to anyone in Breckett County. She came in a sensible Camry, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the 3 documents for a long time. They didn't know. She said, "Someone in that company knows now. They're betting I don't." She looked at him. Federal treaty supersedes state eminent domain. We file an emergency injunction in the Northern District. We get a stay. And Meridian's entire development proposal collapses. She paused. But we need to move before Talley can create enough county-level noise to eat our timeline. How fast? End of week. Do it. After she left, Earl drove to Athens and sat in a coffee shop with Frank Dillard, 61, grey-bearded, formé Atlanta Journal-Constitution, had won a state press award for a corruption series that got killed by his editor after a call from the wrong people. He had a contact at ProPublica who'd been building a file on dark money real estate flows in the Southeast for 2 years and needed a Georgia thread. Earl put a USB drive on the table. 11 counties, 3 states, 7 families who lost property. Same pattern, every time local official. Shell company. Consulting payments that don't show in state filings. Same Atlanta law firm registering every company. He pushed it across. One woman named Dolores Watkins tried to fight. Her barn burned 11 days later. County wrote electrical fault. The fire marshal reports to the county commission, which was chaired by a man who received $40,000 from a Meridian-connected company the year before. Dillard stared at the drive. The FBI, I went. They said no. Earl looked at him steadily. 2 days after my visit, I got a building code notice. Someone in that system made a call. Dillard went very still, which means the FBI isn't the play. Your story is? He nodded at the drive. When this publishes, the people who said no are going to have a very uncomfortable conversation about what 2 journalists found in 3 months. I need 10 days. You've got 10 days. If something breaks before that, publish. I'll work with whatever happens. Dillard pocketed the drive. He looked at Earl. You've been building this a long time. 14 years in the back of my mind. Earl said, 6 months on paper. He drove home in the dark. The building code inspector came Wednesday. Patricia was there with a camera and a legal pad. The inspector, a county employee named Reeves, who kept his eyes slightly off-center from everyone he addressed, produced 4 citations. 2 were invalid, 1,970 code, applied to a structure exempt under Georgia's historical building provisions. One was a bathroom ventilation fan that Earl fixed that afternoon for $47. The 4th claimed his well pump house was inside a prohibited setback from the eastern property line. Patricia photographed Reeves's measurement, photographed the 1,971 county land survey, photographed the 1,999 certified survey Earl had commissioned himself. The coordinates Reeves used placed the property line 40 feet east of where it actually was, the same 40 feet that appeared in Meridian's development proposal. She filed it as Exhibit 7 inches the federal proceeding. The injunction was filed Thursday and landed with Senior District Judge Miriam Yates, 70 years old, former civil rights attorney, 30 years on the federal bench, precisely 0 patience for what her clerks privately called County Courthouse Theater. Then Friday morning, Earl's bank called, business account flagged, suspicious transactions, review period 2 to 4 weeks, outgoing transfers over $500 on hold. He stood at the kitchen counter and worked through the calendar. Soybean buyer payment in 18 days, property tax installment in 3 weeks, equipment maintenance he'd been planning since August. If he missed the property tax, the county could file a delinquency, lien a second legal route to the property. Independent of the eminent domain, he called Patricia. They flagged the bank. He said. She was quiet a moment. Then Earl. I got a call today. Preston Voss, Meridian's attorney. He said the offer could go to $600,000 if we resolved the federal filing by end of week. A breath. He also said litigation at this level gets complicated for opposing counsel, that bar complaints sometimes emerge over procedural issues. He said it in a very friendly way. The kitchen was quiet. Earl had planned for the building code, for the bank account, for the FBI being useless. He had not fully anticipated what it would feel like to hear that someone was pressing on his lawyer. Patricia Okafor had a practice and a family and a reputation she had built with 14 years of work. She had taken this case because she believed it was right. And now the other side was showing her what believing it could cost. Patricia, he said carefully, I need you to tell me honestly what you want to do. A long pause. When she spoke, her voice was steadier than he expected. I want to know if we actually win. Yes. Not. Yes, he said again, flat and certain. The treaty is real. The pattern documentation is real. And the federal standing is real. The only question is whether they can make the cost high enough to stop us before we get there. He paused. I'm going to give Dillard something on Voss specifically. If Voss's name is in the story as a material participant, filing a bar complaint the same week looks like exactly what it is. He's smart enough to know that he won't file. A long exhale. Okay. He hung up and moved money between accounts and paid the property tax installment 4 days early. The second account. Different structure. The one he'd set up 18 months ago when he first started understanding what was coming. He almost made it in time. The system flagged the transfer as a large outgoing from an account under review and put a 24-hour hold on it. He sat at the kitchen table for the better part of an hour, looking at the clock, working through the math. The tax payment would clear at 9 a.m. The next morning, the tax office's delinquency clock didn't start until the end of the business day. He had 7 hours of margin. He had built in 7 hours specifically. He went to bed. He did not sleep particularly well. Not from fear, from the particular discomfort of a man who has laid every piece of the board and then has to sit and wait and trust that the pieces hold at doishaptis prezecha. M. Sunday, the motion sensor triggered on the barn, 2 figures at the tree line, moving slow and low toward the structure. Professional spacing. Not teenagers. Not opportunists. Men who knew how to move in the dark. Earl was on the phone before he'd finished reaching for it. Darnell. 2 on the barn. Don't. I know. Everything's uploading. He watched through the window. I'm going to do something Talley won't expect. He keyed onto the county radio frequency. Breckett County. This is Earl Hutchins. 4,140 Hutchins Farm Road. 2 trespassers on my property at my barn. I'm 71 years old. I live alone. Requesting immediate response. The 2 figures at the barn stopped moving. 12 seconds. Then the dispatcher, a unit in the area, Ita, and Talley, over the channel. Cutting her off. This is Sheriff Talley. I'll respond personally. The 2 figures melted back into the tree line. 20 seconds later, nothing. Talley arrived at 2:51 a.m. He walked the perimeter with a flashlight. He wrote in his report times no evidence of trespass, possible motion sensor activation by wildlife. He handed Earl the copy at the porch steps in the dark. Probably a deer, he said. Earl looked at him. Probably. Talley studied him, the mirrored sunglasses off now. And for the first time, Earl could see his eyes directly. Not confident, calculating. The look of a man who has been expecting to find something and found the opposite. 600,000. Talley said quietly. Just the 2 of them. The dark. The county road empty beyond the driveway. 30 days. Man your age, with that kind of money, could live very comfortably. Wouldn't have to worry about incidents out here in the middle of the night. Incidents, Earl said. Big property. Lot of dark space. Earl looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for coming out, Sheriff. Talley put his hat back on. He walked back to the cruiser without another word. Earl went inside and called Patricia. The cameras caught them. He said, faces. Time-stamped. 3 cloud accounts. A pause. How clear. He'd looked at the footage already. Low-light cameras. 2 in the morning. The figures moving through shadow at the edge of the sensor range. The movement is clear. The faces one is good. The other one is partial. He stopped. Partial might not be enough for an ID. Silence on the line. Is the movement itself enough to show intent? He asked. For the injunction hearing? Yes. For criminal charges against specific individuals, we'd need the face. She paused. Earl, partial is still something. It shows Talley's report is false. No deer moves like that. and it gives Judge Yates exactly what she needs to expand the injunction. A breath. It's enough. It's just not everything. Not everything. Earl repeated. He stood at the window, looking at the dark barn. He had prepared for many things. He had not prepared for the possibility that the best evidence of the night would be 80% of what he needed, and not 100. Call Judge Yates' emergency line at 8. File the footage. He didn't go back to sleep. Judge Yates convened an emergency hearing Monday morning. She watched the cloud footage without expression. She saw what Earl had seen: the movement, the spacing, the professional deliberation of it, and one face in the light that was clear and one that was shadow. Voss argued the figures were unidentifiable, and the footage proved nothing about his client. Judge Yates put her reading glasses down. Mr. Voss, your client is attempting to acquire property under an injunction. This court has stayed. The plaintiff has presented footage of 2 individuals moving on his property in a tactical formation at 2 in the morning. He has presented coordinate fraud in a county building inspection using your client's own boundary figures. He has presented a documented pattern of identical conduct across 11 counties, including an arson that a county official with financial ties to your client described as an electrical fault. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard every variety of this argument for 30 years and finds it no more interesting than the first time. I am expanding this injunction to include any contact between Meridian Group, its counsel, agents, or contractors, and the plaintiff, or his property. I am ordering production of all communications between Meridian Group and Breckett County officials in the past 3 years, and I am referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District. After the hearing, on the courthouse steps, Patricia said, "The partial face, if they identify the man independently through the Northern District investigation, then it becomes complete." Earl said, "The footage doesn't have to do everything. It just has to open the door." He drove to Hawkinsville that afternoon. Dolores Watkins was 63 and living in a mobile home 70 miles from her old property. She answered the door in a bathrobe. When Earl said his name, she immediately tried to close the door. "Mrs. Watkins." He kept his voice level. "Not urgent. Patient. I'm not asking you to fight anything. I want you to know that in about a week, a federal court is going to have a documented record of what happened to 7 families in 3 states. Your barn is in that record, whether you sign anything or not." She looked at him with the particular wariness of someone who has already trusted the system and watched it write times, electrical fault times, while her livestock burned. "Then why are you here?" "Because right now the record has a property loss and a casualty statistic. I want it to have your name. Your barn. What was in it. What it cost you. And what the sheriff's investigator wrote while you were still standing in the smoke." He met her eyes. "The difference between a statistic and a person is a name, and I'm not willing to let them keep yours out of the story." She looked at him for a long moment. "And if I sign something, and then nothing happens to them?" "You mean?" "Yes. Then your name is still in a federal court record, permanently, which means the next time someone in another county tries to pull out of the same fight, they can look you up and know they're not the first." He paused. "But I don't think nothing will happen." She looked at him long enough that he thought she was going to close the door anyway. "Then," she said, "come inside." She gave him 2 hours. She signed the affidavit with a pen that ran dry halfway through the second page. Earl had brought a second pen. She looked at it, took it, and kept writing. When he left, she was standing in the doorway. "Does it work?" she called after him. He stopped at the truck. He thought about the honest answer and the useful answer and where they were the same. "They're already afraid," he said. "They only threaten people they're afraid of." He drove home in the dark. 2 days later, Earl came home from a hardware run to find a county vehicle parked in his driveway and 2 men he didn't recognize standing at his front door. They wore civilian clothes. No badges visible. When he pulled up, one of them held out a business card county planning office and said they were there to verify the structural integrity of the main residence in preparation for a potential condemnation review. You need an appointment for that, Earl said. Sir. We have authorization. From whom? The man started to answer. Earl looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has assessed threat levels in actual hostile environments and finds this one, measured objectively, fairly low. Show me the authorization document. The document they produced was a county planning form, signed by a deputy director Earl had never heard of, citing a structural risk assessment triggered by the building code violation, the one the county had filed and then failed to uphold. The form was dated that morning. They were trying to use a voided citation to generate new access authority. I'm going to call my attorney, Earl said pleasantly. You're welcome to wait. He called Patricia from the porch while the 2 men stood in the driveway. Patricia told him to photograph the authorization document and not allow entry under any circumstances. He photographed it. She filed an emergency motion to the federal court within 2 hours, arguing that the county was using manufactured access claims to conduct unauthorized inspection of the plaintiff's primary residence. While a federal injunction was in effect, the 2 men left at 4:30 p.m. without entering the house that night. A brick came through the window of Patricia Okafor's car, which was parked in front of her office in Milledgeville. No note, nothing taken, just the glass on the seat and the streetlight coming through the hole where the window had been. And Patricia standing beside the car in the cold with her phone pressed to her ear, not going inside, just standing there, working very hard to keep her voice from shaking. She called Earl at 10 p.m. He sat with the phone for a long moment after she told him he had run plans that accounted for pressure on himself, the bank, the building code, the surveillance. He had run plans for pressure on Dillard and on Darnell. He had not run a plan that ended with Patricia Okafor calling him from a parking lot, glass on her car seat, voice carefully controlled. Are you okay? He said. Yes. Patricia, I said yes. A breath. I filed a police report in Milledgeville, not Breckett County. Milledgeville PD. It's on record. Another breath. Earl, I need to tell you something. When Voss called me last week, I said I was okay, and I was. I meant it. But tonight I'm sitting in a parking lot, and I'm going to tell you the truth, which is that I have 2 kids and a practice I built from nothing, and I am aware of what this is costing. She paused. I'm also not stepping back, but I needed you to know that I know what I'm in. I know, he said, and I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just win. He sat at the kitchen table after they hung up and did not move for 20 minutes. He thought about every person who was now carrying some portion of what he had started. Patricia with her broken car window, Dillard with a source who'd called twice to say he was having second thoughts about going on record, Dolores Watkins, who had picked up a pen in her kitchen and written her name and then put the pen down and looked at it like she didn't quite recognize her own handwriting. He had asked all of them to believe that the foundation was solid enough to hold. He went to the basement and sat with the metal box for a while. The 3 documents, the treaty, the survey, the EPA letter, he had authenticated them. He knew what they said. He had spent 6 months building the architecture around them. The foundation was solid. He went back upstairs and called Frank Dillard and told him that the county had sent unauthorized men to his door and that someone had put a brick through his attorney's car window, and that he needed the story to run on schedule, and that he had new material from the unauthorized access attempt that would be filed in the federal proceeding by morning. Thursday, Dillard said. Thursday. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in 2 weeks. 4 pickup trucks came up the driveway 2 days before the story ran. 12 men. Darnell Webb was first up the steps. 57. Army Ranger. Macon. The economy of movement that doesn't fade. Behind him, men in their 40s and 50s. Different backgrounds, different histories. The common thread, something that had happened a long time ago in a place most civilians had never been. A man with a prosthetic hand stopped at the base of the steps. Fort Bragg, 97, field medicine class. I still have the notes. Earl looked at him a moment. How's the hand better than the alternative? They didn't just walk the perimeter. On the first morning, a former intel specialist named Torres swept the fence line and the barn with equipment he'd brought in the truck bed. He found 3 cellular trail cameras mounted in the tree line, positioned to observe the barn, the farmhouse door, and the south field. Not county equipment. No identifying marks. Darnell came to the porch. Someone's been watching you for a while. Earl looked at the cameras laid out on the table. How long? Hardware wear pattern. 6 weeks minimum. Maybe 8. 8 weeks ago. Before the injunction. Before the building code inspection. The surveillance had started before any of it had been filed, which meant someone in the county apparatus had known Meridian was moving on this land before the eminent domain notice had even been served, which meant the decision to take his land had been made and the opposition had been studied. Before Earl was officially told he was losing, that goes to Patricia. Earl said, and to Dillard. Torres had them bagged and documented before noon. The footage from Earl's barn cameras, the coordinate fraud, the chain of payments. And now, 8 weeks of warrantless surveillance on private property. The federal case was no longer theoretical. It was stacked. Talley's cruiser sat at the end of the road the first day. It didn't come back after that. The story ran Thursday. Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Co-published with ProPublica. 5,000 words. Names Buck Talley. Preston Voss. The shell company structure. The consulting payments. 7 families. Dolores Watkins, her name. Here born. The fire marshal's report. The livestock. And Earl Hutchins. 71 years old. Green Beret. Medal of Honor. 340 acres. And a treaty from 1887 that the county of Breckett had never bothered to look for because they'd assumed the old man didn't know. By Friday afternoon, the Northern District U.S. attorney announced a parallel investigation. By Friday evening, Voss had retained a criminal defense attorney. Talley drove to the farm Saturday at 6 p.m. Alone. No deputies. He came around the side of the house on foot and stood at the base of the porch steps with his hat in his hand. 16 years of practiced authority had left his posture entirely. What remained was a man who had run the same play his entire career and was only now discovering it had a ceiling. You had us surveilled. He said, I had my property documented. There's a difference. The cameras in the tree line were yours? Earl said, or Meridian's. My people found them. They're in evidence. He watched Talley's face process that. 6 weeks of footage of my farm on equipment that had no legal basis to be there. Warrantless surveillance of a private citizen while a federal injunction was in effect. He paused. That's not a complication. Sheriff. That's a federal charge. Talley was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to know who you've been talking to. Lawyers. Journalists. Forensic accountants. People who still answer the phone when I call. Earl looked at him. Dolores Watkins. In Hawkinsville. She signed an affidavit, gave me 2 hours in her kitchen and told me everything, including what your fire marshal wrote while she was still standing in the smoke. He let that land. She said she'd been waiting 3 years for someone to come ask. Something moved through Talley's face. Not guilt. Exactly. The look of a man who has avoided looking at a specific thing for a long time and is now unable to look away. You have no idea what you've set in motion. Talley said, I think I have a very precise idea. Earl's voice dropped the way a room gets quiet before something final. I've been in situations where the only way to lose was to move before the time was right. I've been waiting for the right time since March. You've been reacting since day one. He met Talley's eyes. Every move you made, the building code, the bank, the men you sent to my barn, the cameras in my trees, every single one of them is in a federal file right now. You didn't come here tonight because you have a plan. You came because men like you need to look the problem in the face. He paused. Go get a lawyer. Sheriff. A good one. You're going to need them to explain the cameras. From the end of the driveway, headlights appeared. One set. Then two. Slow. Deliberate. The way official vehicles always move when they want you to know they aren't in a hurry, because they don't have to be. Talley turned and looked. The first vehicle was a dark sedan, government plates. Behind it, a second, and behind that, a news van. Logo on the side. Someone already climbing out with a camera on their shoulder. Dust drifted red in the headlights. The vehicles stopped. Doors opened. A man and a woman in suits. Two more behind them in DOJ windbreakers. Talley didn't move. He stood there with the red Georgia dust settling around him, and the news camera running, and the federal agents walking toward him, and he looked, for the first time in 16 years, like exactly what he was. The woman reached him first. Sheriff Talley, you are in violation of the terms of a federal injunction by being present on this property. I need you to come with me. Talley stood there a moment longer. He looked at Earl. Earl hadn't moved. Coffee mug on the rail. Hands folded in his lap. Same posture he'd had the first morning. Talley came up this driveway, except that morning Talley had read the stillness as resignation. And now he finally understood what it actually was. He put his hat on. He walked down to the agents. Earl picked up his coffee mug. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. 6 days later. They came for Talley at sunrise. Buck Talley was convicted on all federal counts. 7 years. Full forfeiture, including the lake house. Preston Voss pled guilty and cooperated. 5 more officials charged in 3 states. Dolores Watkins received a civil settlement. 3 months later, she sent Earl a letter. 1 page. Handwritten. Last line times I planted a garden this spring. First time since I left. Deputy Tommy Bridger submitted a voluntary statement to federal investigators. Earl wrote him back a single note times, you didn't pick the wrong side this time. That matters more than you know. Earl stood at Margaret's grave on a November morning. The roses were gone, last petals down weeks ago. Stems bare now. The earth around them beginning to harden with the cold. The field stretched out behind him, quiet and grey. Somewhere south, barely audible. The creek was running. He stood there for a while. Then he walked back to the house. The porch light was on. The door was unlocked. The way it always had been. The way it always would be. The land was still there. That was enough. Patience isn't the same as weakness. The two look identical from the outside, and that confusion is exactly what people like Buck Talley rely on. They see a quiet man on a porch, and they think they see a man who has given up. They never consider that the quiet might be something else entirely. If this story stayed with you, I want to ask you one question. What would you have done the morning Talley dropped that envelope on your porch step? Would you have held the line, or would the first threat have moved you? Leave that in the comments. And if you want to hear the next one, subscribe, because the story I'm telling next week starts with a woman on the side of a Georgia highway at 2 in the morning. And it ends with an entire police department answering for what they were absolutely certain nobody had seen.